Well, good morning, everyone. Can I welcome you to the 12th meeting in 2014 of the Infrastructure and Capital Investment Committee. Can I remind everyone to switch off their mobile phones as they do affect the broadcasting system. Agenda item 1 today is decision on taking business in private. Can I seek the committee's agreement to take item 4, which is consideration of the evidence we've heard on Scottish Water today in private? Is that agreed? That is agreed, thank you. Agenda item 2 is Scottish Water Strategic Review of Charges 2015 to 2021. We will hear evidence today from 3 panels of witnesses on Scottish Water's Strategic Review of Charges for that period 2015 to 21. So on our first panel, I welcome Belinda Oldfield, Regulation Manager, and Alan Scott, Water Service Strategy Manager for from Scottish Water. Would either of you or both like to make any opening remarks?
I have some opening remarks. First of all, I'd like to thank the committee for inviting us here today. Ronnie Mercer, our chairman, and Douglas Milliken, our chief executive, wanted me to extend their apologies this morning because they have a previously convened Scottish Water Board meeting. Alan and I are delighted to be here to speak on their behalf. Ronnie and Douglas did speak to you back in November, and they outlined our strategic plans for 2015 to 2021, and they did highlight that we've been very focused on bringing customers into the heart of that process. So Alan and I would like to talk to you briefly this morning about the process for developing the plan and highlighting just how customers' views have been included and give you a bit of an overview. And I think that fits with your request to us. So essentially we work within the statutory framework with the Water Industry Commission for Scotland determining the charges in light of decisions made by ministers on things like the length of the period, the principles of charging and your objectives for investment and any other guidance that ministers want to give us. And essentially that's our starting point. So through this process, we work with the Drinking Water Quality Regulator and with SEPA to explore and identify priorities for investment, and these underpin the ministerial objectives. So it's quite an intensive process that we've been through, and we work collaboratively to establish the programme of investment and enable the Water Industry Commission to set the level of charges for the forthcoming period. The Water Industry Commission introduced a number of changes to the price review process, and one of those has been to increase customers' involvement in that process. And so in 2011, the Customer Forum was established and given the role of independently representing the views of customers as a whole. So during the development of the plan, we've worked very closely with all our stakeholders on extensive customer engagement and research. And very briefly, that research highlighted that our customers wanted to ensure that we didn't compromise existing service levels, that they wanted also to see further improvements in service, but they didn't want to see large price increases. And in fact, they wanted price stability. So those are the main objectives of our plan for 2015 to 2021. When we were developing the plan, we developed service improvement reports for each area of the service that we provide. And these set out the nature of the service, the challenges, the current challenges, the future challenges, and the options and choices available to customers for meeting those challenges. And through a series of meetings with the forum on each of the service improvement reports, they help to identify customers' priorities for service improvements and for investment. So we then produced our business plan. We entered into a period of quite intense negotiation with the forum, and we reached agreement with them in January this year, after very real constructive challenge from the forum. Having submitted our agreed plan to the Commission, they published the draft determination for consultation in March 2014. So, in summary, our plan is fully consistent with the draft determination that's been published and is available on our website. Clearly, this is still subject to the Commission's final determination of charges later in the autumn, and once ministers have finalised their objectives and principles of charging. We think we have a plan that has been negotiated and agreed with customers. It has legitimacy from a customer perspective, both in terms of content and in terms of price. And from our perspective, we've seen significant benefits of extensive customer engagement and involving customers in the process. So Alan and I are quite happy to take questions that you might have.
Okay, that's fine, thank you. So, can you summarise Scottish Water's key objectives then for the next regulatory period?
Yes, it's very much a build on what we've been achieving in this period. We're very proud of the fact that we've achieved most of the objectives set for us in the 10 to 15 period, and some of them earlier than maybe anticipated at the time, and that we're now matching the performance both in terms of service levels and efficiencies of the leading companies in England and Wales. And our objectives for the next period are really to build on this and deliver further improvements that align with the customers' expectations on both price and service, whilst meeting all of the Minister's legislative objectives. The plan's centred around the three strategic objectives that were set out in our long-term projections, which were providing continuous high-quality drinking water, protecting and enhancing the environment, and supporting Scotland's economies and communities to grow. And we've undertaken, as Belinda said, extensive research to inform both the strategy and the plan, and then consulted on that back in February 2012. And very briefly, the research has highlighted that we really must not compromise the existing service levels at the expense of improving in other areas. So that's got to be the starting point. And our customers expect a safe, reliable supply of water, and that their waste will be taken away and properly dealt with. Customers want to see us further improve services in areas such as reliability of supply, dealing with sewer flooding, and they want that managed so that they don't see large price increases. So we've always had to balance the rate of improvement with the affordability to customers. So through 2015 to 21, we'll continue to deliver high service levels that we've achieved in this period, ensuring that our water and wastewater service is amongst the best provided by the UK water companies. And the high-level benefits of the plan are kind of set out on page 4 of our plan, but that's very much a high-level summary of them. We're committed to having fixed annual household prices that increase by 1.6% for this year and through the first 3 years of the regulatory period, with an expectation, with everything working favourably, that we'll be able to continue that right through to 2021. We will continue to deliver further efficiencies and keep charges lower than the average in England and Wales, and we'll still be investing over £500 million a year in today's prices to sustain and improve services. And we'll further improve customers' experience of service as measured by the new customer experience measure for both household and business customers that we're introducing in line with the forum. And we're using many innovative and proven approaches to deliver the service and improve compliance to give us a sort of overall most effective cost for customers. And we'll continue to listen to the needs of the licence providers as the UK market for retail competition opens up, and that will maybe change some of our views as we see how that expands. And the other thing we've committed to continue the sort of legitimacy of customers in the whole process is an annual review meeting of performance with the Customer Forum or whatever body follows thereon that represents customers. And overall, we aim to maintain a financial strength appropriate to the governance structure of the company. So that sort of summarises the objectives of the plan.
So the constraint's been set at 1.6, you said. Do you think, well, are you satisfied that you can deliver on your commitments in the draft business plan with the financial constraints set out in the draft determination?
We've set ourselves some very challenging efficiency targets, and they go beyond what we probably know we can do definitely today. But we believe we have a track record built up over the last 12 years of outperforming, and we're confident that we can deliver for the balance of prices from customers and borrowing in the plan. As I say, we're focused on delivering increased productivity, making service improvements using innovative approaches, and innovation's an ongoing thing, so we may find new innovations as we go through the period, smarter ways to do things, and that's been very much part of the pattern we've seen in this period. There are a number of regulatory mechanisms also available to deal with any significant changes needed to the plan, which have always been in place through the last 3 regulatory periods as well. And on top of that, we've got the rolling investment review in 2018 to take account of any significant change to priorities or any external financial impacts that may arise to consider the balance between service improvement and prices at that stage.
What sort of input do the workforce have on things like determining efficiencies and productivity? And
We work quite extensively with all of the management within the business and with team leaders to actually look at how can we stretch the types of activities that we're doing, how can we do more for less, how can we build innovation into what we're doing. So I think we've got quite good engagement throughout the organisation in terms of meeting quite challenging targets. We have a history of that, and it will be the same going forward. Mark.
Thanks, Camilla. Can I just ask what discussions you've had with key stakeholders regarding the draft determination and possible alterations to the draft business plan?
In terms of stakeholders, we've been involved in ongoing discussions with all parties, with the Forum, with the Drinking Water Quality Regulator, with SEPA, with the Commission, with Consumer Futures, as was, but they have now, their responsibilities have passed over to Citizens Advice Scotland, and with SPSO. So the process all along has been quite involved with all of these stakeholders. You asked specifically about the draft determination, but actually most of our engagement's been with stakeholders prior to the draft determination as we were leading up to agreeing the plan. I'd referred earlier to producing service improvements reports, and quite critically these were agreed with the drinking water quality and with SEPA, so that there was absolutely no ambiguity around statutory requirements before we then took them to the Customer Forum to agree them. We've listened very carefully to all of the stakeholders. We've made changes to the plan with the Customer Forum, having looked at the extensive customer research and deliberated on what was the most reasonable and sensible approach to take. So I think throughout the process we've been quite engaged with our stakeholders, and we've listened to them very carefully.
Scottish Water said that you aim to introduce a new customer service measure. Are you able to give the committee any more information on that, and perhaps give us an assurance that we'll be able to compare that with previous performance, to allow us to keep a watching brief on customer service?
We will be introducing a new customer experience measure, and that will monitor customer service. It comprises two main components: a quantitative component based on complaint volumes and negative customer contacts. It also has a qualitative component based on surveys of satisfaction. Those are unresolved issues, and then independently conducting satisfaction surveys with customers. We are working on this with the Customer Forum, so we've very recently agreed heads of terms with the Customer Forum and agreed a work plan with them, and we will have this in place later this year. You asked about how you would know, how we're doing. That measure is a development of the service measure used in England and Wales. So we will be able to keep a track on how we're doing relative to England and Wales, and that's something that we've assured the Forum of. And it's also going to be developed to make sure that it's there for household customers as well as for business customers. So it's there for the complete customer base.
How will the new measure allow us to compare not just with England and Wales, but with customer satisfaction levels in previous years for Scottish Water?
We'll still have all the measures we have in place at the moment that sit within the overall performance assessment. So we'll still have the existing measures. This is a new measure over and above that we believe will lead to even better performance. So it's a kind of broader measure. It really gets into what drives satisfaction in customers. We'll still have the customer satisfaction measures that we have already in the OPA measure, around the contacts and response times and stuff like that. So it will be an extra over, so we'll still have everything we had before. Okay.
You keep talking about comparisons with England and Wales. Is that the best comparator? I mean, are there other countries that deliver better performance for their customers in terms of providing water and sewage facility?
I think if we broaden it out even further and beyond the water industry, we've been looking at customer satisfaction across different sectors. So one of the other things that we do, and which I should have highlighted earlier, is we'll be adding in a high esteem test, which is built on the UK Customer Satisfaction Index. And this is across all sectors, retailing, utilities, everything. So we'll actually be able to benchmark ourselves. I think Ronnie and Douglas did refer to at some point with the John Lewis or Amazon. You'll actually be able to get a feel for how we rank with more common household names, if I put it that way.
Okay. Mary.
Thank you. The draft business plan requires Scottish Water borrowing of £120 million per year between 2015 and 2021. I wonder if you could tell committee what discussions you've had with the Scottish Government on this issue, and are you confident that the loans will be made available?
Well, to finance the delivery of capital enhancement programme, the business plan is based on, as you say, borrowing of £120 million, and that has been discussed with government officials and is consistent with the indications that the Scottish Government gave us in the September 2013 draft budget. As Belinda's mentioned earlier on, we expect the ministers to confirm this during the kind of next 12-week period, effectively, before the final determination will be made by the Commission. We've no reason to believe that that borrowing won't be given to us at this point in time. We've always had the borrowing we require.
Okay. And are you exploring any opportunities to generate cash from within the business if the borrowing that you anticipate getting doesn't materialise or is less than you expect?
Yes. I mean, we'll always seek to outperform our business plans. We've had a pretty good track record of doing that so far, and we'll continue to seek more innovation, more productivity improvement. That if it yields greater cash surpluses, then there's a mechanism in place that maybe the Commission will discuss later around how that should be dealt with. Should that arise once there's a significant surplus or sufficient surpluses. But that's certainly our intention, is always to try to deliver better for our customers than even the challenging efficiency we've already set ourselves.
Okay, thank you. The draft business plan indicates that forecast annual operating costs will fall from £354 million in 2015-16 to £350 million in 2020-21. How confident are you that operating costs can fall while you maintain your current service levels and continue to invest in the network?
Those are the pure operating costs rather than the capital maintenance costs as well, because the capital maintenance costs are rising slightly. But the reason primarily why those are dropping is the ongoing efficiency and productivity stuff we're doing, on top of some investment we're making in renewable energy and energy efficiency, which will help to bring down some of our energy bill. We would call that broadly stable, the sort of £4 million drop. It's not that big a change in many ways, but we're pretty comfortable we can hold it stable, and we would seek to outperform that. But it might be as we go through the period we find more innovative approaches that actually mean we spend more on operational costs and do less on capital maintenance or capital enhancement costs. So the mix may change over time as we find innovation. So it may not be that number at the end of the day.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Convener.
Okay, Alex.
The draft business plan predicts that total borrowing will increase from £3.584 billion in 2014-15 to £4.184 billion in 2020-21. Doesn't sound much if you say it quickly. Are you satisfied that this increase is manageable and that the assumed average interest rate of 4% over the control period is sufficiently conservative to protect customers from redetermination of charges?
I think that the level of borrowing is manageable. We have balanced the customer revenue and new borrowing to provide a financial strength that's appropriate for our governance structure, and it's in accordance with the Minister's draft kind of guidance and principles of charges. Your second question in terms of the interest rates, we do have a reasonable amount of our debt is reasonably lengthy and therefore secure. It would be wrong of me to say I know what the economy is going to do in the next 5 years, but at 4%, I think the Commission quoted in their draft determination they thought that was reasonable, but probably not that conservative, I would say. But there is a balance between making overly conservative judgments and locking up customers' money for undue reason. So it's about the whole thing in the round, probably, in terms of that's one of the many assumptions that are in a business plan. And that one might go against us, another one might go for us, and we've highlighted all of that in the risks table and opportunities table that's in the plan.
Another thing that appears in the draft business plan is the decision that investment plans will be updated on a rolling basis at 3-year intervals. Can you explain the benefit of this rolling process, review process for customers?
Yeah, I mean, the primary benefit of that is it means that we will always have a greater forward visibility of investment, and therefore our supply chain will have that, so our supply chain can resource more efficiently. So therefore our customers by default get more efficient costs in the delivery of our capital programme. In addition, one of the other benefits is that it allows us to take account of changing priorities or emerging needs, whether it be new legislation or changes to the assumptions around things like the level of investment for growth and meeting new demand that comes if the economy suddenly takes off and growth suddenly shoots up and it's putting out a greater demand. It allows us to take account of changing assumptions that really aren't fully in the control of the company. It also gives us the ability that should any of these sort of financial issues that you kind of alluded to there with the interest rates, if something like that was to happen, it gives us a chance to reconsider the rate of investment with prices. So we have another kind of tool in our kit bag with the Commission that allows us to consider which decision to make at that time and to have that conversation with the customer forum or whichever body it may be at that point.
Although a lot of progress has been made in dealing with the problem, will this also add further to the situation where contractors will have greater continuity and avoid the boom and bust situation that we saw in the early development of
Fundamentally, this should take that away, because what we effectively have at the moment is a plan that runs out to almost 2022 with a tail of investment running from probably 2018 onwards. And then by 2018, we're almost adding another £500–600 million on that goes out to nearly 2024–25. So in 2021, you've still got at least 3 years ahead of you, or not fully 3 years, but quite a bit of it. I think the other advantage, just going back on that, was it also stops us from locking in solutions too early. It gives us more chance for some innovative thinking. So it gives us a chance to reconsider some of the things. So there's some of the things that we've got in the plan that we know we need to do, but we've agreed we'll decide what's the right thing to do by 2018, which lets us do a bit more study and investigation with either DWR or SEPA or any other parties to say, is that the right balance of risk and cost to take here? Can we do something really innovative and try it? And it gives you the fail-safe that if the thing doesn't work, you can still come back and do something else as well. So it will definitely give you the continuity, but it also gives a lot of other
So it
benefits.
facilitates a more sophisticated approach to investment.
Yeah, it really does. It makes a continuum really rather than stop-start, as you say.
Thank you.
Okay, Gordon?
Thanks very much, Convener. The business plan outlines 4 new service measures, and you've already touched upon one of them that will be developed for the next control period. Can you outline what these are and how they will assist in monitoring Scottish Water's performance?
I think there's a number of service measures. We've touched on the new customer experience measure. I don't think we've got 4 new service measures in the plan. But I'm quite happy to talk to overall performance assessment, which is Alan's touched on earlier. We will continue to use that, and that measures overall performance of various elements of the service that we provide. We have the customer experience measure, which I touched on, which is new. The high esteem measure, that's also coming in, that we'll work on with the forum. And then we have a number, we will also be continuing to use the overall measure of delivery. So that measures the capital programme and the performance of it and whether that's still on track or not, and that will still be used. And obviously all of the investment will be monitored through the Outputs Monitoring Group, which was chaired by the government. There are a number of other individual items that we're looking at within the detail of the business plan, and we'll be discussing those with the forum and working them through jointly as we go through the period.
I'm happy just to focus on the customer experience measure, and I know Mark's asked you a couple of questions about this already, but when Ronnie Mercer was in November, he commented on the overall performance assessment by saying we have outperformed our customer service target, which is good, and he continued to go on to say our customer service is at record levels. So If that's the case, what's the need to introduce a customer experience measure?
I think where we are at the moment, and Ronnie rightly highlighted that we've been outperforming that. That's about it's a very quantitative measure at this point in terms of bringing through customer complaints and how those are handled. And what we want to do is actually move to a position where it's actually looking more at customer experience and customer satisfaction. So it's not just about people who have a problem with our service and complain about it and making sure that we address that very quickly, but it's also about making sure that customers generally are satisfied with the service that they're getting, that if they have to phone us and contact us, then their experience is good. So it's actually having both the quantitative and the qualitative element. So it's a bit like phoning you up and saying, did we respond to you quickly enough? Were you satisfied with the service? We appreciate something did go wrong, but actually did we make it right as fast as we could and to your satisfaction? And were you comfortable with that at the end of the day? We'll also be contacting customers who've actually had no problem with the service at all to make sure that they are actually content. We're not going to take for granted that because they haven't got in contact with us, that they're generally content with the service, either on a day-to-day basis or perhaps if they've been affected during, if we've had a particular outage, they may have been affected, but for whatever reason they didn't contact us. So we would want to tease out, just how satisfied are they with the service that they get from Scottish Water. So it's really going above and beyond where we are just now.
So basically what you're saying is that out there appears to be a level of dissatisfaction with the service, and therefore you're bringing in this customer experience measure to try and address that. And I'm just wondering about the written evidence we've received from Citizens Advice has said we recommend that a regular and independent review of customer experience measure is carried out. This will verify Scottish Water's score and will provide customers and stakeholders with assurance about Scottish Water's performance. Why do you think that Citizens Advice need that reassurance?
Well, if I can just address your first point. What we don't have at the moment is a level of dissatisfaction with the service. Broadly, through very, very deep bank of research that we've done with customers, what we've got customers telling us is that they're happy with the service that they get. When they do have issues with us, we respond to it fairly quickly. Now, there will always be isolated issues. There will always be customers who, for some reason, are dissatisfied on some particular point, but broadly, customers are satisfied. In terms of a regular independent review, prior to the Citizens Advice Bureau being set up, what we agreed and assured the forum that we would do is actually that we would have this independent review. So this is not Scottish Water measuring itself and trying to tell everybody that we measure it and it's great, so it's fine. We're quite happy to have a very transparent public scrutiny on that, have an independent review, and that's what we agreed with the customer forum. Now, as it's transferred across to the Citizens Advice Bureau, I'm sure the Citizens Advice Bureau are echoing that they would welcome that. But I don't think it's born out of a level of dissatisfaction.
And you've touched upon it, the need to actually split the customer experience measure between domestic and non-domestic customers. If you find that there is different levels of satisfaction between those two groups, are you in a position over the review period to refocus resources to tackle that issue? If there's a disparity between the two customer experience measures?
I would say it's likely that they'll be different. They definitely won't be the same. We'll have higher in household versus business or vice versa. And I think what we're doing within the company at this point is actually making sure that we take the customer experience to a new level. And we're doing that whether it's for household customers or whether, excuse me, it's for licensed providers, because licensed providers do actually interface with business customers, but to make sure that the actual service that's delivered to business customers from Scottish Water Wholesale is also sitting at a high level.
And just for clarification on the answers that were given to Mark earlier on, in order to compare performance in future years with previous years, you said that would be able to be continued, but the draft business plan on page 44 says we will replace our current customer satisfaction measures with the customer experience measure. So how does that work?
Our current customer satisfaction measure is something we use internally we picked this up as being really important in terms of driving service higher. So it's something we've been using internally, which was it's very close to what the customer experience measure is, but in discussions with the forum we've agreed a slightly different mix of the weightings of things and the factors to be taken account of. So the measures that are monitored in the business plan at the moment are all under the OPA kind of banner and serviceability targets. The customer satisfaction one was one that Scottish Water did of its own sort of volition in many ways. But we have seen it as being very important in driving up OPA and the overall service performance. I think, going back to what Belinda was saying earlier on, one of the key things about focusing on this customer experience is to get us away from being just one of the best of the water utilities to being one of the best service providers in the UK. So it is about kind of putting customers really at the heart of what we do and trying to understand the specific issues in different sectors of our customer base, and what we do to respond in each area will be different. We've certainly found in this period one of the things, customers are reasonably tolerant of something going wrong. They accept that, you know, the sort of things we manage, there can be asset failures. What they're not so tolerant of is repeats. So it's driven a lot of focus into dealing with recurring issues and trying to get out there. And some of the more proactive stuff, I think that Douglas or Ronnie might have mentioned before around the Intelligent Control Centre that we're putting in, that's going to try and predict and, you know, get the response out there almost before the event happens. So that kind of indicator is probably driving us to the next level of service that's beyond probably product service levels. It's more how you feel about the company and how you feel when you interact with it, and the value and trust that therefore you would have of us.
My final question relates to the carbon footprint in the business plan. Over the past 5 years, the draft business plan states on page 34, over the past 5 years we have reduced our carbon footprint by 10%. The proposals in the business plan will only reduce Scottish Water's carbon footprint by 2%. So do you consider this sufficiently ambitious given Scottish Government climate change targets?
Yes, I think it's helpful to put it into context. We've been steadily reducing our carbon footprint, but actually increasing levels of treatment required to meet European legislation have increased our energy usage. So what we've managed to do over the past 5 years is actually offset that increase by the work that we do on leakage, the work we do on increasing efficiency, where we're doing a lot of pumping, whether that's water pumping or wastewater pumping, and investing in renewables. So, as you say, overall in the past 5 years, the carbon footprint has been reduced by 10%. What we believe is that our carbon footprint would have actually reduced by around about 20% if the quality and standards enhancement investment over the last 10 years hadn't actually taken place. So going forward, what we're doing is we're continuing to work towards reducing energy usage. We're implementing investment to efficiently reduce consumption. We're exploiting more renewable opportunities, new renewable energy opportunities. And all of that is really to offset increased standards coming through on the water supply and the wastewater collection system.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you, Convener. A note from the briefing we've received from Citizens Advice Scotland, who've taken over the Consumer Futures roles and responsibilities from just earlier on this month, that Scottish Water do not do enough to protect those struggling to pay their bills, and that a vulnerability strategy is required. Would you care to comment on that, on those points, please?
Yep. I mean, I think in terms of dealing with customers directly for their water and sewerage bill, as you're aware, that Scottish Water doesn't do that directly, so it comes through council tax. Do we do enough to protect vulnerable customers? I think the way that charging is actually established through the council tax system has its own inbuilt protection mechanisms. And so there are a degree of how charging is structured down on the sort of Band A, Band B charges. And a number of excuse me, a number of discounts that are available. So that's all in line with government policy. It's in line with the way council tax is established here. Do we do enough to protect vulnerable customers? We had a discussion with Consumer Futures just prior to the end of March as they handed over to Citizens Advice. We met with Consumer Futures and with local authority heads, heads of finance, to actually examine what needs to be done in terms of protecting vulnerable customers. And certainly at Scottish Water, we're very happy to look at more customer awareness, more education, more campaigns around that actually help where we can. But that's within a framework with the local authorities and with Citizens Advice now going forward.
So you're not taking you're not responding directly to these comments then? I understood the Outputs Monitoring Group were going to have a look at this.
We are working with the Scottish Government and other stakeholders, including the Forum, to investigate what more can be done to support, but it has to be done within the current Minister's principles of charging. So there is work ongoing, and it kind of started about 6 months ago in terms of trying to look at this issue and what was achievable within the current kind of framework in which we operate, because obviously charging is a Minister's principle at the end of the day, so any change would have to be ratified by Ministers.
Can I ask, Mr. Scott, you said in your opening remarks that you, one of your objectives was to increase the economic activity in the economy of Scotland. Can I ask how you do that? I mean, for example, when we've been discussing the procurement bill, and I know Scottish Water doesn't come into its confines, but what engagement do you have with stakeholders and businesses to let them know what work is coming up under Scottish Water, so that companies can decide whether they are in a position to be able to bid for that? You know, sometimes because of your long-term strategy that Alex Johnson mentioned, it may be confined to just a few companies that are kind of in the mix, if you like, to get the work. And how are you making sure that you're getting the best value and that you're giving lots of companies the opportunities that they may have to bid for work?
You're right in what we say in terms of we have major frameworks and alliance arrangements for the bulk of our programme, but we do commit to supporting local communities and local development with the use of the rural framework procurement approach that we've got, and we've had specific frameworks for requirements in the islands, as well as one for North and Argyll regions that are very much using local contractors. And this is not, unfortunately, my area of expertise, but I know we've had a sort of market day with a lot of the local suppliers recently. And if you want, we can provide more information in our written response from the procurement team, if that is suitable.
No, I mean, it's that kind of thing that we've seen Teesside Procurement Forum do, kind of, as you call them, market days. But if you're doing that with suppliers, is that likely to happen throughout the country? Or?
That'll continue, yes. And as we work with our alliances, I'm sure there'll be work with some of the alliances that they will wish to use local suppliers where it's more efficient for them as well, because probably they will see the bulk of the stuff that's efficient for them to do is largely kind of central beltish in terms of where the majority of their resource will be, and they will probably seek to use the same sort of approaches. But those alliances are only just being formed just now, and as I say, it's not my area of expertise, but if you wish more, we can certainly provide a written response.
Anyone else got any further questions for Scottish Water? No? Okay. Thank you very much, both, for your input this morning. That's been very helpful. So I'll briefly suspend the meeting to allow the witnesses to leave the room and the next panel to take their seats. So, continuing our consideration of item 2 on Scottish Water's strategic review of charges, I now welcome our second witness, who is well known to this place, and proving that there's life after being an MSP. Can I welcome Peter Peacock, Chair of the Customer Forum for Water. Peter, do you have any opening remarks you'd like to make?
I was going to say it was a pleasure to be here, Convener, but then I thought I haven't heard your questions yet, so I'll maybe... but it is a pleasure to be here. I'm not going to say anything really by way of introduction, other than I think there are two quite distinct aspects to this. One is about what's in the draft determination based on the agreement that Scottish Water and the Customer Forum came to, and the detail of that. But also, I think there's issues around the process that's been gone through here, which is very innovative and very new, and is actually attracting a lot of interest as breaking new ground, not just in Scotland, about how to involve customers in regulation, but much more widely than that. Indeed, at an international level, people are showing interest in what's been going on here. So I think those two aspects are perhaps distinct, and I'm happy to answer questions on any of them. Just go straight to questions, Convener.
Okay, so maybe if we start off with that, I mean, how have you gone about collecting the views of Scottish Water customers, and how do you represent these views to the key stakeholders?
Well, I mean, I think that's the absolute key to what the forum is about, because in a sense your first question to Scottish Water was what was the objective of the plan and what were their objectives. I guess the forum's objective was to first and foremost find out what customers did think about their services and where they wanted improvement, where they were concerned. Otherwise, the forum wouldn't have any legitimacy. I mean, we were just 8 people selected for that particular purpose, to put ourselves in the place of customers and think what they might want. But unless you find out in detail, you can't actually do that. So a huge amount of effort was done jointly by Scottish Water and the forum in trying to find out what customers thought. Extensive focus group work, something like 1,000 what were called stated preference questionnaires, interviews rather with household customers, 500 interviews with business customers, online panels and so on. And then in addition to that, the forum itself carried out independent work on what was customers' attitudes to willingness to pay, to affordability, because we had particular concerns about that. And we ran a series of interactive workshops, or focus groups rather, on those particular issues. And then we commissioned a couple of bits of work. One was from the CAB Service and Child Poverty Action Group, which was looking at the changes in the benefit system, tax credits, pensions, and so on, and to tell us what they thought from their experience of dealing with people in their bureau and more widely, what were the impact of those on household disposable income. And we also got work done by some academics on the effect of household incomes of the recession, and looking at, you know, the impacts in terms of part-time employment, disposable income in households, and so on. And also those academics gave us some advice on the differences between CPI inflation and RPI inflation, because we were beginning to become interested in that. So we did all of that. We spoke to COSLA about some of the issues that they may have. We spoke to some developers, big businesses, about the issues they had. And on the forum, we had some representation from business. So there's a wide range of ways in which we sought to get that information. A lot of it done with Scottish Water. And I would say, Convener, that having come into this cold and not really knowing Scottish Water, I have become, you know, hugely impressed by their commitment to try and find this out. And once we got all that data, I think one of the key things we did was we sat down with them one session we had one day and said, right, what does this mean to us? Can we agree what this means in terms of investment priorities, in terms of potential pricing and so on? And we came to an agreement from that of what the investment priorities should be. And then that was fed into all the service improvement reports that were mentioned by Scottish Water as one element of the consideration about different aspects of service. Those reports had a section saying, and this is what customers have told us about this part of our service. So a huge amount of effort going into that, and that was helped inform us. And we saw our role as, in a sense, taking that right to the heart of the decision-making process and continuing to assert a customer perspective into that. And I have to say Scottish Water were more than willing to hear that, because it's pretty clear to me that they've come to recognise that by really listening to their customers, they can improve their services. It helps inform them of how they can improve. So that was, if that helps, that's a broad explanation.
So what were the key issues raised by customers during the strategic review? And is there much of a difference between domestic customers and business customers? Because, well, speaking personally as an MSP, I don't get many domestic customers complaining about services from Scottish Water, but I do get quite a few from businesses. So what have you discovered in your...
Well, I think, I suppose the first really revealing thing that you discover when you start really probing with customers is how little they understand about water and Scottish Water. And, you know, if we observed quite a number of the focus groups, a rather weird experience. You're behind a two-way mirror watching these things going on. But it's fascinating when you hear people talk about things. So people are largely unaware. They don't think about Scottish Water. That's probably quite a good thing, because if they were thinking about it constantly, it might be because they've got complaint about it. They're not hostile to Scottish Water. They tend not to know what they pay for water, and people will give you opinions from £30 to £300 in answers to questions. And that's probably because their bill comes as part of the council tax bill. So are largely unaware, but when you probe deeper into that, there's no hostility to Scottish Water. People are actually quite proud of what they receive by water. They turn their tap on, it's a good quality service, and they pull the plug in their sink and things disappear and are taken care of. So it's not front of mind for people. When you dig deeper into that, they want to maintain the current levels of service. There's a very interesting phenomenon, which one of the consultants who did quite a lot of the research work commented on, is that there appears to be a high degree of altruism among Scottish consumers. In this sense, that although they've got a good service, and it's very reliable, as soon as they discover that not everybody all the time gets that service, they are more than willing to see those problems addressed for other customers, even if it affects their bill marginally. So they're quite altruistic in that sense. I have to say we tested that out a bit further because we weren't entirely convinced about that, but it did seem to hold to be true. They then tell you things like, we want our water quality to improve if that's required. We expect Scottish Water to deliver to the environmental standards, both in terms of water quality and environmental discharges. They are pretty angry when they see water running down the street. They don't like that, and they want to see it dealt with quickly, and understandably so. Sewer flooding is regarded as simply unacceptable by people. Even if I'm not flooded around my property, or worse still, internally with sewer flooding, it's simply unacceptable that anybody is, and there's a high degree of recognition of that and desire to do something. They want continuity of supply, so they want as few interruptions as possible. And when you question people or probe them about the effects on climate change, making all of that potentially much less certain, more drought on the one hand, more flooding on the other hand, having an impact on service delivery, they nonetheless want continuity of supply, and that implies much more resilience in the system than perhaps there is at present. We discovered that, notwithstanding that the technical standard for water pressure would tell you that way under 1% of people should have any concern about water pressure, actually in survey work, something up to 15% think they may have a problem with water pressure. So we're looking into that in much more depth, actually, as to why that is the case and whether the technical standards are too low relative to what people actually want to experience. And they come up with things like taste questions and odour questions, but these are pretty small by comparison to these other things. So that's what householders will tell you. Businesses will tell you largely the same. They actually put leakage problems higher. I think they think it's even more wasteful if there's water running down the street. They are much more hawkish about what they pay for water. They want to have complete justification for any increase in costs to them, because in their business environment they're having to manage pressures on their own costs and simply can't pass it on to the customer very often. So they're much more hawkish on that. And of course there are recurrent issues that we picked up, particularly from smaller businesses, feeling that they were unable to control what they felt was a pretty high fixed cost to them, and actually saw it more as a taxation than a charge. That's perhaps oversimplifying, but that's to try and characterise it. So there are differences between the two sectors. So I think that's a kind of quick summary of where we are with that, I think.
Okay, and how satisfied are you that that the key stakeholders, not just Scottish Water itself, but all those involved with the provision of water, are taking all these issues on board? I mean, you said that Scottish Water themselves are, very keen to do this, but there are other people involved as well, like the companies who provide services for Scottish Water.
Well, I think there's a number of different stakeholders around. I mean, we had some contact with the supply chain to Scottish Water, the people who are actually on the ground building things or maintaining things. And I have to say there are varying views about Scottish Water in that sector. I think they feel that they have been required themselves to deliver significant more efficiency to help Scottish Water deliver that, and they feel that the Scottish Water has been pretty tough on them at times, but there are benefits to be had from that in terms of price and so on. So we've had contact with those kind of stakeholders. We've obviously had a lot of contact with SEPA and the Drinking Water Quality Regulator. And I think for the most part, and thankfully this is the case, that the objectives that they are pursuing in relation to environmental directives from the EC, and therefore trying to have those implemented in Scotland, are much in line with where customers are, because it relates to water quality and environmental discharge, improving bathing water qualities, all that kind of stuff. So we're all much in line on that, and I think that's quite helpful. I think there was a point during this process where the Drinking Water Quality Regulator and SEPA were probably a bit, maybe anxious is overstating it, but we're certainly wondering what the customer forum was going to be saying. And I think the worry there would have been, are we going to focus on price issues and try and, if necessary, to get a good price, reduce investment and therefore affect their plans? As it transpires, there has been no need to do that. And in fact, I went out my way to reassure them about that at one point, that we weren't, from a customer point of view, trying to undermine their wider interests as stakeholders to all of this. But I don't know if there's wider stakeholders that you're thinking about. That's okay.
Thanks. Jim.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning. You signed a minute of agreed modifications to Scottish Water's draft business plan for 2015 to 21 on behalf of the Forum on the 30th of January. Can you share with the committee what you feel are the key outcomes of that agreement, and just explain what you think the benefits that have been delivered on behalf of customers?
Okay. I mean, I think the first thing to say is it was actually a very significant moment that we were able to sign that. And once we'd seen the draft business plan, because of the process we'd been through, there were not a huge number of surprises in that on the investment side. But nonetheless, we then had about 12 hours of very detailed discussion with Scottish Water to thrash out a lot of detail that is now in the minute of agreement. And we regarded it as quite an achievement, as did Scottish Water, that we actually got to the point that we'd been asked to by the regulator to see if we could agree. So I just note that in passing. I mean, what does it deliver? Well, from a customer point of view, if you look at the investment programme, it maintains that investment programme in the future, 500 million a year roughly in capital investment, and that allows you to address some of the issues I touched on that came up in research about sewer flooding, about water quality, about better environmental discharges, and so on. So it delivers all of that. And therefore, that not only maintains service, but seeks to improve levels of service. I guess the other big area where actually I think we made, and members have been talking about this in the earlier session, made a lot of progress, and in some ways quite surprising progress. We didn't necessarily know where we were going to end up in this, but I think the suite of performance measures you now have are much more comprehensive than they were in the past. And as you were questioning Belinda Oldfield laterally, about the customer experience measure in particular, looking at qualitative aspects of service delivery. So you've now got an overall performance assessment, the OPA, which allows you to do historic comparisons, and it's important for that reason, both within Scottish Water year on year, but by comparison to companies in the south. But you've got the customer experience measure, which now not only looks at household customers, it looks not just at the quantitative things, it looks at qualitative things. And therefore really probes people about their experience and was it good or bad. And it's going beyond people who have contacted Scottish Water into a wider perception. So if you're in a place which has had an incident, a big flooding incident or something, burst pipe, you know the kind of thing you see in the evening news, sadly from time to time, but it happens, then you not only get to explore what the immediate people who were flooded felt and how Scottish Water dealt with that, but we're now asking, and Scottish Water and the Forum agreed, is to look at the wider community and what was the impact on that, those who were held up in traffic or who couldn't get to work or the shop was closed, and what were the impacts there, and how well did Scottish Water deal with those people who didn't feel quite strongly enough to get in touch with them but nonetheless were affected by the incident. So a much deeper level of that. Also looking in the customer experience measure, and it comes back to your point, Convener, about business customers' experience, and that has not been looked at in the past, and that's going to allow Scottish Water to get a better idea of that and how they can improve. And the other measures, the high steam test and so on. So you're having a much broader suite of things against which you can actually judge Scottish Water's performance, and it actually allows them to dig deeper into what people feel. And that can only bring benefits in tailoring services for customers into the future, I would have thought. And then, I suppose, the other big area is the question of prices and the impact on customers of the price arrangements that the draft determination from the Commission is suggesting be set after consultation, and that's based on the agreement you're referring to. So what is happening? Lower prices, and it's in real terms lowering prices, but it's not lowering prices relative to RPI, it's lowering prices relative to CPI, the lower inflation measure. And I think that was quite a significant development by the Forum and Scottish Water in discussion, that we were saying to them quite early on, look, RPI doesn't mean a lot to people if their benefits are only got up by CPI or their pension is or whatever. So shouldn't we be thinking in CPI terms rather than RPI? And that, a consensus was reached between all the parties around that. That level of fixed nominal increase of 1.6%, I note CPI has dropped to 1.6%, so it looks slightly less good than it was 3 months ago. But nonetheless, the important thing about the 1.6%, and this is where Scotland is breaking a bit of new ground in this regulatory process too, it's not just for 1 year, it's for 3 years, in fact, including this year. There's actually a 4-year period with the indicative intention of keeping that going right through to 2021. Now, why is that important? It's important for customers in that it gives a reasonable price increase relative to trying to achieve the objectives, but you've got stability in that, and you've got clarity now of what you'll be paying each year for the next 3 years and possibly up to 6 years. And we think, as Scottish Water, we're readily able to agree that in the end, that's important to customers. There's also a CPI safety net, if I can put it that way, that if inflation kept falling at CPI level, then over the 6-year period of the settlement, whatever the annual rate of CPI is, it's got to end up in aggregate 1.8% below CPI. So there's a kind of safety net under there if inflation falls for customers, and that's quite important too. And the other side of the equation is wholesale customers' prices being kept at minus 0.3 below CPI each year. So a lot of helpful things, I hope, in there for customers, and that's why we felt able to sign it off in the end of the year. And I do stress that this was agreement. We have all agreed to this. This is not a question of us having beaten up a reluctant company or them having lulled us into a false sense of security. This was agreement after a lot of very detailed discussion, and I think it helps deliver those kind of things.
That was a very comprehensive answer. You did outline in your previous answer to the convener the extensive level of engagement that there has been with customers, and also the academic research that has been commissioned by the Forum, for example, the impact on household incomes from the recession. Can I ask you about written evidence that the committee has received from Citizens Advice Scotland, where they state in relation to water and sewerage household debt, quote, "We believe that existing processes prioritise and incentivise the maximisation of revenue and do not do enough to protect those struggling to pay their bills." Can I ask you if you have a view on that, and do you think Scottish Water could do more to support those customers who are in debt and struggling to pay for water and sewerage charges?
Okay, well, a couple of things about it. First, I'll make it clear that the Forum was asked to operate within existing government policy and within the existing regulatory framework. We don't have an advocacy role for the change of government policy or the change of that framework. So we can find ourselves within that. That's one important point to make. Having said that, we also were raising issues about vulnerable customers, partly because of the research that we saw and the very wide-ranging impact of changes in benefits and tax credits and so on. These were not narrow phenomena affecting only small groups, they were quite wide phenomena. We were also aware that even if you were in full council tax benefit, your water bill was not being rebated well, you get 25% when you got that, but you would still have a debt, even if the remainder of your council tax was being paid. And that came as a shock to customers. We knew that because they thought they didn't have a debt and suddenly they did, and that has impacts. So we were probing and having discussions with Scottish Government, and I had a discussion with the Chief Executive of CAS at one point where this was raised as well. And to cut a long story short, this does fit within the framework of government policy and pricing policy. The council tax system of itself is, if you like, shifting resources from the better off to the less well off, if you believe that's related to property values, and therefore it is progressive in that sense. And then there's that small additional, or actually in money terms, quite a large additional help within Scotland. If you're in full council tax benefit, you can get up to 25% on your water bill. But even beyond that, the question was still being raised, well, is there more that could be done? And Scottish Water were saying to us, look, if there are things that can be done within the framework of government policy, because it's not their job to change that, they're happy to look at that. And what's been agreed as part of flowing out of the minute of agreement is that there will be work done on vulnerability, to probe that a good deal more and to see what is the relationship between a customer in those vulnerable circumstances and their water and wastewater charges, and to see what might be the art of the possible in that. Now, my own personal hope is that, and I think Alan Scott mentioned that in his evidence, that that should be done collectively between Scottish Water, Scottish Government, local authorities, Citizens Advice Scotland, and in their role in representing customers. And we can just see where that might take us if there is more that can be done.
Okay, that's helpful. I mean, I think Citizens Advice Scotland had suggested that there could be a comprehensive vulnerability strategy which would allow those issues to be looked at, and particularly what more can be done to protect customers in vulnerable situations. That does sound like a positive development. I'm just wondering, do you have any thing further that you can add in terms of timescales and when we could see
I don't, other than that we are trying to sort out with Scottish Water the work programme flowing out of that minute agreement, and one of the things that's to be looked at some point is vulnerability, and I'm quite sure from what you're saying that CAB Scotland, Citizens Advice Scotland, will be pressing that pretty hard, but from my experience so far there are people willing to listen, but there are also constraints within that and within government policy currently, and we have to think about the whole thing in the round.
Okay. You mentioned the customer experience measure, which is one of the new innovative developments arising from the constructive engagement between Scottish Water and the Customers Forum. And my understanding is that will provide a direct feedback mechanism for customers. But we're at the theoretical stage. We haven't seen the implementation of that. So I'm just wondering if if you're sitting here in 6 months' time or a year from now, what would you be looking for in terms of how that had be implemented?
Well, you're right. The first thing is that we've got agreement that there should be one. We know what the heads of agreement are on that it should have a quantitative aspect, it should have qualitative aspects, some of which is about customers' actual experience, those who have been in touch with Scottish Water and that wider perception range. You've got a dimension that's to do with business customers, a dimension to do with licence providers, and a dimension to do with developers to try and find out their views. And what we're now sitting down, in fact we had a meeting with Scottish Water last week, and we're now going to sit down and try and work out in fine detail what that is actually going to mean for implementation in 2015. And Scottish Water, I should tell you, are already out doing quite a lot of surveying. They've commissioned work to be done, and in fact they've just increased the sample size of that survey work, because one of the things they've discovered when you begin to disaggregate the satisfaction data to look at these different dimensions, and they've only looked at really perception of customers who have not contacted Scottish Water with a complaint. They've begun to look at that, and there are different perceptions of Scottish Water, so they're now probing into that. I mean, my hope for this overall is that Scottish Water and all the stakeholders around the table of this industry, and vital industry in Scotland, get a much more sophisticated feel for where customers actually stand on a range of questions. And if you can get that feel, and I have to say that the thing that I've really learned with working closely with Scottish Water is they are very keen to find this out, because they know they can then improve, and they are driven by their desire to improve the customer experience very heavily. I mean, Scottish Water perhaps rashly, with the benefit of hindsight, have said they want to be Scotland's most valued and trusted company. I can tell you we've quoted that back to them quite a number of times. But if you actually believe that, well, who are you valued and trusted by? It's not just the decision makers in society, it has to be by your customers. And if you really want to be that, you've got to really understand where your customers are, and you've got to be close to them. And the only way you can find out is by doing it very deliberately. And I think that's what these new measures help achieve.
Thank you.
Did you want to come in, Gordon?
Can I ask a very quick question about the existing overall performance assessment? The OPA for the last 3 years has exceeded the target by, on average, 10% a year. And at March 2013, which is the last figures that's been reported, it stood at 368, with 2 years of the current period still to be reported. What's your view about the OPA target that's been set for the new review period of only 382.5?
Okay, well, this was a subject of a lot of discussion in that final phase of discussions between the Forum and Scottish Water. It's resulted in a much better understanding between the Forum and Scottish Water of what the objectives are here. I mean, the OPA, if you look at it, is really the only objective scientific measure of levels of service. So it's very important. And from a customer point of view, it's quite important that Scottish Water is seen to continue to try and move that score up. Otherwise, the implication, the message it gives is, well, are you settling at 380? Is that fine? Well, it's not fine. And they don't think it's fine. Their aspirations are much greater. I guess Scottish Water would be anxious that if on paper, in a formal agreement, you set that level too high, it becomes unachievable, potentially very challenging. And that's got implications for how you motivate your staff in the company and so on. And they use OPA very clearly to try and drive improvements. So they want to see gradual improvement. The 382.5 you mentioned is the average guarantee. They want to get up to 385. And 385 is actually equivalent to about 387 in today's terms because there's a technical adjustment, so it's slightly higher than it first appears. But also, the aspiration is quite clearly stated is to get up to 400 and to exceed 400. And we were content from a Forum's point of view to say, well, okay, we're on the move on this, we're continuing to see progress. Very few companies in England, which is the comparison who use the same measure, have continuously exceeded 400 points. So that's quite a challenge. And Scottish Water are already achieving about 100% of quite a number of the 17 scores. So they cannot improve on those measures. So I think within these kind of broad parameters, this is a reasonable agreement. And we were happy to agree to it. And Scottish Water were happy to agree to it. It keeps performance moving forward. The aspiration is clear. And I'm pretty confident they're going to move up there, and I know that they want to move up there. They want to be, because they want to be the most valued and trusted company, and they genuinely want to be able to demonstrate that partly through these hard measures that the OPA represents. So we found agreement on that, and we were very happy with that agreement.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Alex.
Yes, the proposed changes to the exemption scheme for small third sector organisations has caused a bit of concern among some organisations, especially churches, I've noticed. Have you taken these concerns to the government?
No, is a short answer. Let me explain that, though. As I mentioned in response to another question, we were asked to operate within current government policy and within current regulatory policy. And we regarded that matter as a matter really of government policy. The government of the day introduced the scheme, and it is for the governments of the day to decide whether to have it or not. Now, so we didn't. We knew it was also subject to a separate consultation, which was directly going out to those parties who were affected by it. So we didn't take a position on that. Having said that, the Forum did touch on this informally to first of all decide, should we take a position or not? And that was our conclusion. It's not really our business to do that. There's a separate consultation and it's part of government policy. But it was interesting, actually, in the informality, and this is not a formal position, but I'll just reflect it to you, that you're talking about a scheme which I think annually is 3.6 to 4 million, something of that sort, in a business that we're looking at the draft determination today, which over the 6-year period is an £8.5 billion enterprise. So it's a tiny, tiny part of the overall cost, if you like. Now, there is a cost, because that money that is going in charitable exemptions is therefore not available for investment or to reduce prices, and it's part of the non-domestic side of the equation. So there is a cost, but in the great scheme of things, it certainly didn't seem to the forum to be of such great scale that it would be worth us commenting on, and it is clearly a matter of government policy, was our view.
I see what you mean when you describe it as a very small element of cost. But there are concerns, and these concerns have been brought to MSPs. Are you suggesting that if we want to influence the policy of government, then it's our job, not yours?
I was just saying it's entirely a political matter.
I will take that to heart, and I'll take it up. Thank you.
Okay, Mark.
Fiona, can I ask if the Customer Forum have any concerns about the non-charging aspects of Scottish Water's business plan or the WICS draft determination?
No, I mean, I think the important thing I referred to earlier is that what we've got is what we agreed. So, by definition, we are content with it. I suppose in any negotiation between two parties, either side doesn't get everything they want, but that's the nature of negotiation. But no, we think that there's a lot of progress across a wide range of fronts, and some of that is to do with much more about customer experience stuff. Some of it is about hard delivery of new services, about reducing sewer flooding, about improving water quality, and so on. But as an overall package, we think that it's a very acceptable package.
Is there a particular aspect that you'll pursue in future agreements that you think perhaps didn't come through in this round?
Well, I think that that inevitably, although this makes a lot of progress across a lot of fronts, it doesn't solve every problem. And there are things that are quite clearly emerging which are on the work programme to look at. And I think the importance of it, I can't remember if it was Mr MacDonald's question or somebody's question earlier about or maybe it was Mr Johnson's question about the IR18 process, the investment review process, halfway through the current settlement period. The important thing about that, I think from a kind of customer point of view, is that some of the issues that aren't yet resolved, but are clearly rising up the agenda of consideration, have now got time to be looked at over the next few years, and there's a midpoint where you might decide to take some action on some of those. Now, there's some obvious things that I've mentioned in the draft, in the minute of agreement, and touched on in Scottish Water's business plan. I mean, it's quite clear that there are issues arising about the connection of private supplies to the public water supply. Is that the art of the possible, or isn't it? A lot of that's in rural Scotland. There are huge costs involved in that, but are there alternative ways of dealing with that? So there's a bit of work going to be done about that over the coming period. There are questions arising about, can we go further, not only of the statutory standards about lead in water, but go beyond that and to remove more lead? And again, there's going to be work done to look at all of that. So to that extent, there are always issues that are going to be being looked at. The question of vulnerability is another one of these kind of issues to look at. But the good thing about the rolling investment review process is you actually get a chance to look at that within reasonable time. And if there's a case to be moving some of these things forward, then they'll be considered at that point. And from a customer point of view, customers' voice will be around that table at the same time in the way that this process has operated up till now. So I hope that answers your point.
Thank you.
Mary?
Convener, this is the first time that the Customer Forum has been involved in the process around the review of charges. How beneficial has your involvement in that process been? What value is it brought to the representatives of the Customer Forum? And I suppose I would also want your views on how beneficial it has been for Scottish Water to have your involvement in that process.
I think it's quite difficult for me to say, you know, what added value the forum has brought. I mean, it's really for others to comment on that. And there's an independent evaluation being done of the process by Professor Stephen Littlechild, who's a well-known expert in this kind of field internationally. So that will help, you know, other people decide whether it's been of value. What I can tell you is that Scottish Water tell me that they have found it of great value, that they have found it very challenging at times. We've found it very challenging. We've had to learn a huge amount. And we've had to learn to balance the short-term interests of customers with the long-term interests of customers. And nothing you do in the short term should threaten that. I think that Scottish Water certainly have felt that they have been asked to do a lot and have had to think afresh about some things, just because we were coming into meetings. I mean, I have to tell you, there must have been times where they left our meetings pulling their hair out and thinking, what do we have to do to convince these people? You know, is that because there were some quite off-the-shoulder hard messages given to Scottish Water about how they may be viewing things. They have told me subsequently that, and if they were feeling bad about it, they certainly didn't let it show. They were very professional about the whole thing. They have come back and said, look, these were hugely important conversations, because for the first time we looked at a problem from a different point of view. Rather than looking at it from a technical or professional point of view, or an environmental standards point of view that were driving their behaviours, they were starting to look at it from a different perception, because we were putting those kind of thoughts in. So I think they've found it valuable, and I think that the detail that Mr. Eady was probing about what's in the settlement itself gives a lot of things. So therefore, I think customers have got a lot out of this. So I think I would deal with your question in that way. I think I would say something further than this. I don't think you should underestimate just how innovative this process has been. And very few people in the world have tried this in regulatory policy. I mean, there's some examples of it in America, but it doesn't tend to be bodies of retail customers. It tends to be more wholesale customers who are acting together. And I have to say, I think that the Water Industry Commission have been inspired in this. I really do. I think that they have been thinking hard about how do you, within the regulatory framework, empower customers more. And I think the really powerful thing about what they did was to say, look, we're asking you, customers, this group on behalf of customers, and you, Scottish Water, to agree. And if you agree, we, the regulator, are minded to accept that agreement. Now, that's a pretty powerful statement. Now, I think that what that did was that it gave the forum enormous scope and enormous latitude, but equally the Commission throughout, and there was a lot of conversations with the Commission, were setting out parameters for us to operate within. No point in us discussing things that were never going to be acceptable to them. So they set clear parameters, but gave a lot of scope within that. And I think that the clever bit about that too is this, that they were giving scope and latitude to customers, but as the regulator, they weren't giving away any power. Now, I know, because I've been party to discussions in the South, not every regulator would have behaved like this. A lot of regulators would have thought they were ceding power in some way to the customer group. Actually, I think the really clever thing about this is that they were giving latitude and scope for customer involvement, detailed customer involvement, but not giving up any power. Because although they'd be minded to agree, I was very clear right throughout, that was no guarantee they were going to agree. And they have a statutory responsibility which they have to fulfil. And in the end of the day, they've been good to their word. They've checked out everything that we have done. They've checked out the agreement. They've made sure it's satisfied all their requirements that they're required to have as an accountable public body. And then they've embedded that agreement within the draft determination. Now, you know, that is very empowering, I can tell you, for customers. There was one moment in the very long day of discussions we had with Scottish Water, and I don't want to mischaracterise these, they were very professionally done and very constructively done, but there was one point where the Chief Executive was really looking at my eyes and saying, are you really serious about 1.6%? And I was looking back and saying, I'm dead serious about 1.6%. And we came to agreement. But I can tell you, we felt empowered on our side of the table at that moment. And that was done by the framework the Commission have created, whilst at the same time knowing that we had to behave responsibly and sensibly and not compromise the interests of the long term of the company, and that we knew that the Commission would check all of that out. Very powerful process. And we know that lots of people are paying an interest in this, not just for what it's done here, but what might be the implications of this for energy policy, railways, other regulated sectors, other wider implications from that, about empowering customers in new ways. So I really take my hat off to the Commission for the way that they've dealt with this. Very, very helpful and supportive, but also for Scottish Water in the way they've responded to it. And I think, coming back to your original question, that's allowed them to hear perceptions they didn't hear before. It also meant, this last point, it also meant in terms of the process that they were having to think about things earlier in their business planning, up to a year, 18 months earlier than they've ever done in previous business planning cycles. Why? Because they had to come and explain it to a group of lay people and try and justify their proposals. So that meant they had to think things out very carefully earlier. And I know, again speaking to Scottish Water, that in just going through that process, they really rethought a number of things in their business planning. So it brought more transparency and it brought earlier planning as well.
Thank you for that very thorough answer. And I did have an additional question, but you've already answered it, so thank you.
That's exactly what I mean.
Just, you know, throughout the session you have said that that's not part of our remit, or it's not within the framework that we have to operate. If, as a result of today's 3 panels, we were to write to the Cabinet Secretary with recommendations, are there changes to the framework that within which you operate, or the parameters that you would like to see?
Well, that's a very interesting question, and just to be frank about it, I've not thought in a sufficiently detailed way to really give you a solid answer to that. I mean, I guess what I would say is this, that having got through this particular process, could it be exactly replicated for the next time? I think that requires to be thought about very carefully, because you've got to keep this fresh and dynamic, and you have to think how you do that. Do you want to keep customer involvement empowered at the heart of Scottish Water? Absolutely yes. How that's best achieved, I suppose, there's a variety of ways of doing it. And I know that Scottish Water invested a huge amount of senior management time in talking to the forum. And I guess that they don't want just to write that off as well. They want access. In fact, we know, we've just set up some arrangements. They want access to forum members to bounce ideas off them and say, look, from where you sit, how does this look? So I think there needs to be a powerful customer voice in the heart of it. I think the other thing I would say is this, from my experience, that part of the reason, I think, but this would have to be confirmed with Scottish Water, I think part of the reason they opened up to us in a very honest way behind closed doors about what were the issues facing the industry and so on, was partly because we didn't have any statutory powers and we weren't consumer advocates against policy. So they didn't know that, they did know that anything they told us, they could tell us without us, I'm going to overstate this, but without us ending up with placards on the basis of that information arguing for a change of government policy. So it was a kind of secure environment. And I think it is important to distinguish between, in going forward, between a group who do sit within regulation policy and are not there to challenge it. I think that's quite an important thing to maintain. And the role of challenge now falls to Citizens Advice Scotland in terms of the wider policy and taking over the role of Consumer Futures. And I think that's quite an important distinction actually to draw. So, but to keep a customer dynamic at the heart of this, I think I would absolutely urge you to recommend, yeah.
And you said that, you know, other bodies were interested in this type of customer engagement. Is it very different? Well, let's put it very bluntly. There are some parties within this Parliament who would like to see a change of the status of Scottish Water and not public body as it is currently. Is it very different when like private water companies who in England, for example, who are looking at what you're doing here, would it be very different or difficult to replicate that because the body is private as opposed to public here?
I have thought about that. I went to an event in London a few weeks back actually to hear Professor Littlechild talking about regulation and customer involvement, and this was a very broad international audience, and one of the points he made, and he drew a distinction between what happened in Scotland and what had happened with a similar, analogous process south of the border, where the water companies were asked to set up challenge groups of customers within the company framework. And a shorthand for this is that the regulator down south, Ofwat, then said, look, if the customer challenge group and the company can agree broadly the business plan in the way that I've described, not quite the same, but broadly the same, then the regulator would fast track them through the regulatory process. It turns out that a number of them, they all agreed, but only one has been fast-tracked through the process. And that's now raising pretty fundamental questions down south about, unlike the way that the Commission handled things here, that would not work. Now, within that framework, the other key difference is that these are privately owned companies. And I've thought a bit about this because people have put this to me, that could this work in a private setting, private ownership setting? And I don't think in principle it would be any different. You're injecting a new dynamic, and the powerful thing is asking them to agree, and the incentive of agreeing is, and this is where I think they've maybe erred down south, if you like, is that they haven't stuck to what was agreed. But I think that's the real power at the heart of it. But in a sense, you see, in the Scottish context, you've got a government dynamic because of ownership with Scottish Water, which you don't have with the companies in the south. And in one sense, you're simply changing the shareholder as private shareholders' interests for the government interest. Now, these are not entirely the same, but nonetheless, we've had to account for government policy and think about all of that in this. They're not thinking about that anywhere near as much down south, but they are thinking about shareholder interests. But wouldn't it be a good thing to apply some customer pressure on shareholder interests? Question mark.
Does anyone else have any further questions? Okay, on that note, we will leave it. Thank you very much, Mr. Peacock, and I briefly suspend to allow the next panel to take seats. So we now come to our final panel this morning, and I welcome Professor Gordon Hughes, who's Chairman, and Ian Tate, Director of Investment of the Water Industry for Scotland. Water Industry Commissioner for Scotland, yes. Do either of you want to make any opening remarks?
I haven't prepared an opening statement. We'd like to thank the committee for this opportunity to answer the questions. And I would like to very briefly make a couple of clarifications in response to questions that came up earlier, because it may be helpful from the committee's point of view. The first was that there was a discussion about whether the procedure that we, the Commission, followed in Scotland might have been possible down south with a differently owned structure for the industry. It so happens that we had a meeting with Ofwat last evening, and this morning Ofwat has made an announcement that 2 companies have actually gone through their enhanced procedure and have essentially agreed draft business plans and therefore draft regulatory agreements with Ofwat as a consequence of that. And in fact, on comparison between what we have been doing and what they have been doing down south, actually there's a very great deal of similarity between the two. And I'm confident that Scottish Water would have acquired an enhanced status and would have been treated in roughly the same way down south as they have been treated up here. So that's testament to the fact that Scottish Water stands out as being among the best of the companies within England and Wales generally. And that's the second point I wanted to allude to. A question was made, well, what about making comparisons outside England and Wales, rather than just looking at reference between Scottish Water and the rest of the UK? The situation is it's very difficult to make comparisons outside the UK because we don't have a common base of information, either in the way it's collected and the way it can be interpreted. However, I think what one can say with a considerable degree of confidence is that, at least as far as costs are concerned, Scottish Water are among the best. They're among the best in the UK, and they're among the best on a worldwide basis. It's much harder to make that judgment about customer service. So we have concluded that in general terms, the performance of Scottish Water is very good by a broader set of international comparators, both in Europe and places like Australia and elsewhere, from a point of view of their costs. But it may be the case that they have got rather further to go in terms of matching the best in terms of their levels of customer service. So thank you for the opportunity to make those clarifications, which I hope are helpful, and I'm happy to answer any further questions.
Okay, that's fine, thank you. So can you set out the details of the charge caps for household and wholesale customers and tariffs levied by licensed retail suppliers set out in the draft determination, and what these might mean in practice for customers?
Well, as the previous panels have said, there are 2 components to the household charge cap, which is that for the first 3 years, the increase in prices from one year to the next will be 1.6% per year. And indeed, that was the case for the current revision of tariffs that came into effect at the beginning of April. For the longer period, for the full 6 years, there is then also a cap of CPI minus 1.8% cumulatively over the full 6-year period. Now, since everybody up to now has been used to making comparisons with RPI, it made it helpful to compare the last regulatory period with the current regulatory period from the point of view of households. And our draft determination, based on our expectation of the difference between RPI and CPI, is equivalent to an overall charge cap of RPI minus 1.05% a year, which is almost identical to what we set in 2010, which was RPI minus 1% a year for 5 years. So essentially, it's very similar in terms of a charge cap over the full period of the review. For non-household customers, for business customers, it's essentially the same. But the default tariffs we expect to remain constant in nominal terms for the full period. So what that means is that what we call the retail margin, in other words, the difference between the wholesale charges and the default retail charges for business customers will narrow gradually over time, since the default retail charges are simply going to be held at their current value for the next 6 years.
Okay. Adam, do you want to follow up?
Yes, thanks, Convener. Could I ask what impact these charge caps can have on the plans and proposals set out in Scottish Water's draft business plan?
We believe that the resources that are provided by these charges will enable them fully to complete the programmes that they have outlined in their draft business plan, and to do one or two extra things as well, which were uncertain in the draft business plan, but have been clarified to a degree as a result of the very intensive discussions that have taken place both with the Customer Forum and with the Scottish Government, with SEPA and the drinking water quality regulator. So essentially, provided that they meet the efficiency targets that we believe are reasonable and achievable, they can fully finance their plans. And indeed, they produced a revised business plan very recently. I can't remember, it was about a week or 10 days ago, which incorporated all of that in the revised version of their business plan, and which is fully compatible with our draft determination, as well as the agreement that you've heard about between the Customer Forum and Scottish Water.
So that there are no areas where the two are at odds with one another?
No, we believe not. But it has to be remembered that all of this is subject to the Scottish Government confirming its objectives for Scottish Water over the next regulatory period. And that is something that we expect them to do by the middle of the summer. So essentially there could be changes that would arise because of changes that the Scottish Government introduced as a consequence of reviewing all of these discussions and the agreements that have been arrived at.
Okay, thank you. Now, consultation on the draft determination closes in June. Can you explain how you intend to respond to any issues raised during this consultation and what impact it might have on the final determination?
Well, we can explain the process rather than the content of the things, because it will depend on the nature of the comments. What we will do is consider all of those items that have been provided in detail. It is likely, I believe it's standard practice, to publish the comments that we receive, and then we will produce a revised final determination in the light of that, with, as appropriate, an indication of how we have responded to the concerns that have been raised in the comments that have been made up to then. We hope that we have tried to take account of a very wide range of interests and concerns from a very large set of stakeholders. And so we hope that the comments will be, how should I put it, relatively minor in comparison with the intensive discussions that have already occurred. Right. But we will see. Yeah.
It might also be useful to add for the committee that the final determination will take account of the finalisation of the Minister's objectives and principles of charging, which is due at the end of June as well.
I take it there are no emerging themes yet, too early in the process, is it, in terms of the consultation?
One of the themes, yes, it is early in the process, but one of the themes that's been touched on is consideration of things like rural provision, where you know, the finalisation of the Minister's objectives in that area might bring some additional requirements that we would need to then consider for the final determination.
Okay. So maybe I have to have you back. Maybe in our August.
Draft determinations are called draft determinations because they're not final.
Thank you. pointing that out. Yes, convener.
Okay. Can I ask if you're satisfied that Scottish Water's assumptions regarding interest rates, the availability of borrowing and total debt are sufficiently robust to protect customers from an unexpected rise in charges later in the control period?
As Scottish Water have explained, they have a relatively long date, maturity for their debt. The interest rates on much of their debt are therefore fixed, and it would require an extremely sharp rise in interest rates. We've provided for an increase in interest rates over the period, but we think that the assumptions are robust. It has been indicated by both Scottish Water and the Customer Forum that we defined ranges that we regarded as reasonable ranges for the discussions, and the interest rate assumption that was made by Scottish Water is within the range that we regarded as being reasonable, given the information that we have and given the fact that none of us have a crystal ball about what will happen to interest rates.
Okay, thanks. Gordon.
Thanks very much, Convener. What's your view on the need to develop a new customer satisfaction measure, and why has the measure not been finalised at this late stage of the review process?
We believe that that's a very important step, that it's really moving on from what in the OPA is fundamentally a complaints-based measure of customer satisfaction. In other words, did the company respond promptly and adequately to the complaints? But that's a long way, as you have heard, from a complete picture of the views that are held by both non-business and business customers of Scottish Water's performance. And so it's very important to go beyond that straightforward current measure to one that is much broader. And of course, it incorporates, as you've heard about, this high esteem target, which is essentially a desire beyond just customers, but the desire by Scottish Water to flag themselves out as, in some sense, an outstanding company in terms of their reputation and performance for everyone in Scotland, all of whom practically are affected by one way or another in terms of the way they do their job.
And this new customer satisfaction measure, how will that relate to the overall performance assessment index, and how will it affect the calculation of it?
It won't change the way in which the OPA is calculated, because we wanted to retain that as a standard benchmark that carried on, so we could compare where they have reached the end of this current period with where they then go, and that they maintain, do not slip back on what has happened in the period during the last 5 years. So essentially what we're doing is broadening out and adding to the targets that we're expecting them to meet. Now, inevitably, that's not an easy thing to do, and we're concerned that we shouldn't just overload the creation of more and more targets, which is why I didn't fully answer your question about why is it not ready by the draft determination. We believe that we've really got to spend time piloting the measure in order to get one that is satisfactory, that is believed by the customers, and reflects fully both the views of the Customer Forum and society at large.
And on that particular subject of the overall performance assessment, in the Water Commission's report for 2010-11 on Scottish Water, you commented that the OPA, that Scottish Water plans to achieve a score of between 380 and 400 by 2013-14. Given that the OPA score at March 2013 stood at 368, and the 2013-14 figures won't be ready until December 2014, or won't be published until December 2014. Do you think the new OPA target of 382.5 on average over the next 5-year period is ambitious enough?
The We believe that the Scottish Water has, in fact, as of the end of the year 2013-2014, actually exceeded the 380 target. By how much we have yet to confirm, but we expect that they will be significantly above that. Is it ambitious enough? Well, it has to be seen in the context of the fact that the maximum possible score on the OPA is of the order of 405 to 407. So it's a very narrow band that we're now talking about. And our main concern was that they shouldn't slip back. In other words, that they should maintain the area of performance that they've already achieved and turn their efforts to doing other things in terms of this new customer experience measure, because our belief is that they've reached, if not as high, but they're getting to the frontier of what they can possibly achieve on the OPA. Now we've got to challenge them to do better on customer service.
Okay, thanks so much.
Jim.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, gentlemen. The draft determination published in March states, and I quote, "There would be no increase in the maximum charges payable by a non-household customer unless there is a substantial increase in inflation." End quotes. What do you consider to be a substantial increase, and what would be the process that would have to be undergone before any such increase took place?
What we are trying to state is that we would be very reluctant to increase the charges. So it would have to be a very substantial increase. But just to give you the context of this, our PI over the last 5-year period has varied between being negative and at a maximum of 5% a year. I don't seriously believe we could have the level of the default tariffs remain constant if inflation were 5% a year for anything other than a very short period of time. Beyond that, the process would be one in which we would receive representations from Scottish Water, as well as from other members. We would draw up our proposals and then put them out for consultation and respond then to the views that were expressed. I think also it has to be seen in the context of the overall situation of Scottish Water and of the retail market, which is that we have a mechanism which we've introduced, which we refer to as the tram lines. In other words, that if the financial strength of Scottish Water declines below some lower threshold, that there would be then a procedure which we've outlined for reviewing tariffs in general and for asking whether some revision is required either to the investment programme or to the level of tariffs. And the same is true if there are improvements above that in terms of the performance of that. So we view this as part of that tramline process.
I think that's clear. Are you satisfied the Customer Forum? We heard in evidence earlier from Ms Oldfield that they had presented a number of constructive challenges to Scottish Water. Are you satisfied that the Forum has adequately represented the views of Scottish Water customers during the review process?
Yes, we are. I think Mr Peacock has explained that they gave Scottish Water a pretty hard time on a number of issues, and that is our perception of the situation, that they very ably represented the interests of customers. They provided a very important and rather different perspective to the kind of perspectives they were getting from, for example, their market research inquiries, and we think that it was enormously valuable in terms of their contribution to the process as a whole.
Okay. My colleague Alec Johnson asked in the previous evidence session about the review of the water and sewage charge exemption scheme. Is that something that you have a view on, or do you see that as being out with your role?
You're referring to the charities exemption scheme. Yes, we regard that as a matter of policy, which is an issue to be decided by the Scottish Government in the light of the representations that they have received and are receiving about that. And essentially, it's our job, once the decision is made by the Scottish Government, to implement the consequences of that decision in the way we set charges and the overall level of charges.
So just for clarification, then, the consultation that you're engaged in between March and June of this year, that's not an issue that you would consider as part of the draft determination?
It would form part of the final objectives that are set by government at the end of June.
Exactly.
So part of the principles of charges.
If the government were to outline a different set of principles of charging based on that, we would naturally take account of that. And that's the mechanism and that's the role of the principle of charging in the process that we're expected to go through.
Okay. And finally, do you have any views on how the strategic review process could be improved for the next control period?
Every strategic review process builds on what has gone before. I think Scottish Water might feel that the Water Industry Commission in previous reviews has tended to beat them up over costs and has tended to take a variety of challenges which has presented them with a large agenda of issues to address. They have made generally excellent progress in responding to those challenges, and now we are posing them a new set of challenges on the customer side. I think we will review the way in which the current strategic review has gone, we'll think about it, and we'll look at what seem to be the emerging problems that will define the way in which things have to be looked at, both at the interim review in 2018 and in the full strategic review in 2021. And when we see where that's going, we will no doubt either tweak or perhaps make more major changes in the way the strategic review process is. But having just come out of one, I can't say what the direction of change is likely to be in 3 or 4 years' time.
Okay, thank you.
The title of your body is the Water Industry Commission for Scotland. Given that there's going to be an opening up of the non-domestic market in Scotland with other companies coming in, and, you know, companies will maybe have to be made aware that there will be a further level of competition in the industry. Have you considered how that will affect Scottish Water? And has that been taken into account in determining the review period? And also, what about the opportunities for Scottish Water eventually to enter into the market down south?
Well, first of all, in Scotland itself, the market has already been opening up gradually over the last several years, and competition is becoming a great deal more real in that we have 14 licensed providers, including a subsidiary of Scottish Water, but including a number of other entrants, and they are gradually taking market share away from the subsidiary Business Stream, which is a subsidiary of Scottish Water. We are required to ensure that the rules for that market operate in a way that do not act to the detriment of the main household customers of Scottish Water, and it is done by ensuring that either the level of wholesale charges or the level of household charges properly reflect the costs that are incurred in those parts of the business. So the opening up in Scotland will not, we believe, represent a detriment to the regulated business side of Scottish Water. The non-regulated side, Business Stream, is going to face an increasingly tough environment in which they have to compete with a range of competitors offering different services and with potentially different costs. Now, Business Stream's response, which they're fully aware of, is that with the new water bill going through, or almost having gone through, parliamentary approval down south, that they will have an opportunity to enter the market in England sometime 2017 or after that. And they are gearing themselves up to essentially build on their experience, their skills, and all of the other things that they've learnt in Scotland to offer an attractive package to those people who will have a choice in future down in Scotland, down in England, and we hope that they will be successful in doing that. But that's up to them.
Okay, lots to think of in the future. Anybody else got any further questions? Okay, gentlemen, thank you very much for that. And I briefly suspend. Okay, if we move on to agenda item 3, which is subordinate legislation, we have to consider 3 negative instruments as detailed on the agenda. This is to introduce a decriminalised parking regime within the Argyll and Bute Council area. The committee will now consider any issues that it wishes to raise in reporting to the Parliament on these instruments. Members should note that no motions to annul have been received in relation to these instruments. Does anyone have any comments? No. So is the committee agreed that it doesn't wish to make any recommendation in relation to these instruments? That is agreed. Thank you. That concludes our business in public, and we will now move to private session to consider the evidence heard on the strategic review of charge 2015-20 to 21, which we heard earlier.